know, we did. We were even live streaming those. So whenever you're sitting in a more boring talk in the main stage or one of the technical, just tune into our live stream. This will be hopefully very interactive. That means you can always interrupt the presenter. You can ask questions. You can just spread your criticism. No, that's wrong. Bullshit, whatever. We don't care. So we're here to engage with you. And I think you might be getting the most out of it if you actually take the opportunity. Again, if, for example, you think it's too crowded and you only stay yeah. Coming over. I probably so again, welcome everybody to the OTbase sponsor from S4. Welcome to the live stream. This is going to be interactive, so interrupt me, interrupt the other speakers that will present on different topics. We will start our presentation with the topic of vulnerability management. How can we manage? So, in order to give you some intro, I would want to focus you on how vulnerability management used to be done in OT and it used to be a manual process. Most people will simply check various websites where all these vulnerabilities are exposed, or vulnerabilities for vulnerabilities or for the Microsoft Windows operating system. And if you have done that, I would imagine that you ended up in frustration. It would be very, very unusual if you did not, because you will soon find out that if you don't have a chance, this is never going to work. You cannot approach community management, and there is a simple reason for that. First, it's the sheer number of vulnerabilities. Recently, at this day, we are talking about roughly 250,000 different CVEs. Now you say, oh, but many of these are from previous years, like from 10 or 15 years ago. Yes, that's right, but guess what? Our OT systems might still be affected by these, right? So our problem in OT, when it comes to vulnerability management, is very much different from vulnerability management in IT. And at the end of the day, you can Now here's the good news. If you do have this technical information, then this matching can be done automatically. There is no manual intervention required. Because again, all the CV3s, go ahead.
So you define what you mean by configuration.
By configuration, absolutely. So first we are talking about a specific product. Right? So that in hardware, that would be make and model. In software, that would be, well, Microsoft, Windows. It usually goes a little bit deeper in OT when you have to consider their build capabilities for a specific firmware version of your PLCs, of your RTUs, of your actuators, right? Of your network switches. That is what I refer to as configuration. And that is what you need to know if you want to identify all the TVEs that affect your install base. Because every single TVE has a detailed description what the affected configuration is. And you will see that detailed configuration in the CVE description. You will not see it in that part of the description that is intended for human readers. Let's just go about the Cisco switch with version blah blah blah. The actual detailed information is a little bit lower. Let me try to show that. So let's just grab specific CVE. Right, this half an hour ago. This. I just picked the first one that was the. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. But that's not us, that's this. Talking about, well, it's going to be difficult if you want to approach your vulnerability management manually. Then you will run into situations like this, right? So this is just practice. That is configuration. Every single TVE is tied to a specific configuration. If you don't know the exact configuration details, you have no basis for your vulnerability management.
Please, does this mean that if I have the web server enabled on my switch, it will match my configuration line and say, you got your web server enabled and this firmware version, and therefore I can set your vulnerable system?
No, that's a different thing. So the CVE will tell you, well, there is a vulnerability for the embedded web server in that switch. Okay, and then you would check that if you're running this configuration, and if you are lucky, you can mitigate by simply disabling the web server. By the way, good point, because I would say when you think about OT equipment, a lot, like hundreds of CVEs are associated with bugs in embedded web servers. But I mean, you could already say if the product does come with an embedded web server, you are bound to run into it. So that is a given. However, with mitigation, I would say, well, you can probably save time to update the firmware. If you're thinking about PLC, let's just take it. Why could it be a waste of time to update the firmware in order to get rid of that cross-site scripting vulnerability that was just detected in that particular thing? Why would that be a waste of time?
Because the exposure footprint is very small.
No, I would disagree.
They may introduce more.
Okay, so then, I'm sorry guys, but I have to tell you, you're in for a shock. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference because your PLC as such is open like a gigantic garage, right? So I don't need your stupid cross-site scripting vulnerability as an attacker. That's with that PLC, right? I can just use Ethernet IP. I just use the Siemens demo protocol. These natural, logical protocols that all the PLCs have enabled, they allow attackers to do anything they want. In other words, if you would see an exploit, if you would see an actual attack attempt that targets this cross-site vulnerability, you know right away, oh, now we are looking at a damn fool who tries to attack us. Because they obviously don't know that they don't need to go into the web server. They can go straight through the front door. But we are already talking about mitigation at this point. So it's all about the configuration. If you don't have a good idea what that configuration actually looks like, you are lost. If you do have this, all these configuration details on all your installed base, then you're in business. And then
No one has that.
no, so that's not true. But why would you think so?
I have 139 sites that I manage.
Yeah.
But we do not have full inventory.
But
At all,
this is
down to the level that's necessary.
this is why you are here.
I know.
At the same time,
No.
But at the same time, I almost had to call. Go ahead, I'm sorry. I almost had to call bullshit on what you're saying though, because
Uh-oh.
I don't see a calculation of risk on what is my actual exposure. If that PLC has mitigations and factors and air gap, then why would I really?
Getting there? We are getting a. Let me just continue.
Okay.
They're only at the probability matching. That is what I wanted to point out.
Let's see, well, that's the
I think it's a risk.
What do you need for probability match?
Back to this point, have a solution in just the configuration of the switches for the case that
Yes. So, how do we get this? How do we get the configuration details? We get that automatic. So, you get the configuration details automatically. This is what. So you need an OT asset inventory. If you don't have network and complete inventory, your vulnerability management is just not going to work. If you then have that as inventory and you look at all the probabilities, you're in for the next shock. But because all of a sudden you see what we're talking about, hundreds of thousands of probabilities, right? So that is the experience that all users get when they implement OTS inventory. You will see hundreds of thousands of probabilities. And that is also something that the IT experts did not anticipate, right? So that's a whole completely different situation. But one thing I can tell you already, before we then go to mitigation, but just this fact alone already suggests to you, but there is no point in taking the next best probability and going for mitigation. So in OT, you will always need to furnish a strategy. For you and your team arrive at the conclusion, well, okay, we know, we understand, we will never be able to catch or mitigate opportunities. So we need to identify what really matters. In OT, this is an absolute necessity. IT doesn't work better so much because you can do most of the catching automatically. In OT, so how do you deal with those hundreds of thousands of opportunities? That's very easy to implement or define strategy. But before we go there, let's just browse through a couple of pages on the OTbase ODS management. That gives you an idea how all this vulnerability data will be exposed.
Your products will do recovery of assets and configuration.
I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
So your products will do discovery of assets and collection of configuration
Yes.
and
Yes, that's correct. Okay, so what we do is that the basis of all of it is an asset inventory that we collect automatically. This is what where you will see all your OT devices in the database. You will see all the configuration details. You will check immediately how many of these, I don't know, Cisco switches with 17 we are running. Where are these switches, etc. Right? So this is the foundation for vulnerability management process. That's an asset inventory. And once that you have that, you can download the CVE information from this. Then you can match that against each other. Please.
Okay, so for the people who have OT environments, usually want to get them with data. So OTbase in this scenario would be Arrogant.
Arrogant. It's a long time since I have seen it in the airport. But go ahead.
So how would you be just
Okay. So how do we ingest the CVE database? So we have to connect to list. We download this TV, to follow this TV information every 24 hours, so that you're able to inform you about any new stuff. So, let me give you an idea, and you. When you go to the OTbase, you would see over the last 7 days there have been these 21 news given. When I want to get details, just double click on any of these. I see what's in there, see that CVE, and I see all the infected devices. Okay? Just to give you an idea. So we download this information every 24 hours. We need to connect to the internet. And we do that in a secure manner because the discovery in OTbase is completely separated from this central database. Right? So this server that is sitting in the enterprise network. The discovery takes place directly in your process. And from there, that's a distributed autonomous process. And the asset details are pushed up to that central server in a one-way operation. Give you the data. So your processes are never exposed to any internet-facing device. That's a big difference to IT has because they just poke around in all those endpoints. We don't do that. So completely separate.
They show you CVs, or there's only showing CVs that you're affected by based on your
Yes, that's an important additional piece of information. You don't want to see all the CVs. You will only see CVs. So even though we download all the CV details, but you will only see those CVs that actually that affect your installed base. And you would see, as I've shown earlier, you see which devices are affected by those CVs, right? So you can pick any one of these that you're interested in, and you see, right, oh, look, the guys in Charlotte, there are 41 devices in Charlotte that are infected by this particular CV. Was another question.
So is it agent-based, passive? How is it that you're actually getting the information?
It's that old, unsafe, insecure operation that everybody has told you, well, active discovery, never do that. But guess what? You're doing it all the time. You're doing it since day one, right? And so, and that's the only way how you can get down to that level of detail.
I was going to say, it's on-prem or?
It's on-prem, yes. It's on-prem.
So the CVs that go to your on-prem.
The CVEs are downloaded from NIST to your on-prem server. And then besides the CVE, also download the system details on the known exploits. So this is what you will also see on OTbase. By default, you will only show known exploits. And in our data set, that's 278 DVDs for our sample infrastructure. If expose all the CVEs, even those for which no known exploits exist, I just need to uncheck this box. But that's too hard for us. So that's just, it's psychologically difficult to bear, because now we are looking at 9,325 CVEs. And you know CVE can affect multiple devices, right? So, but that also gives you one idea what you will use later on for your community management, because you need to prioritize. What we have found is that this one parameter show us only the CVEs with known exploits goes a long way, because obviously
those with known exploits have a higher likelihood that they will actually be used in an actual attack, right? So again, we're only doing active discovery because that's the only way how you can get this accurate and detailed asset information. Please.
Active discovery into the OT?
Into the OT, yes. It's mind blowing, I know, but
Well, yeah, usually you would scan, you create a database of your active discovery. So you are making it.
that is to the OT. We go deep down. We go through all your different purview levels.
And the vendors have no problem with that.
Oh.
So, that's true.
Well, just check it out.
Told us that our warranty would be doing.
That I would be surprised, but anyhow, we could discuss later.
You're doing a scan, so you're gonna data
The scan like that.
Yeah.
You obviously need inner privilege inside the OT network,
Yes.
or you would have like a
Yes.
that means that information will be inside of OTbase because it needs access to
No.
all the devices.
No. That it does not mean that the credentials that you have in mind, they are in these distributed discovery instances, right? Buried deep down in your process networks. They will not be passed to the central database. Again, that was the flaw within SolarWinds. For anybody who remembers the SolarWinds debacle.
So a follow-up question is that if you then like fill out one of those, it's important that it comes with like documentation, like okay, I need to grant access to my Cisco switch to only be able to read configure it.
That's correct.
Does it provide that information on how to configure this access control on the end devices? Because otherwise,
Yes.
a lot of things will be misconfigured.
Yes.
Maybe a question that so we have an architecture slide because I think you have a solution that you can have a distributed scan solutions, right? So basically the way to do this is to put the scanner somewhere through this one or in that way scanning. Or is it one solution in the interface that is talking about?
First of all, don't use the term scanning. Right? So it's not scanning what we do. Scanning is what
protocols. We're using, for example, Ethernet IP. We're using SNMP. We're using Profinet.
So you're just reaching out and talking full frame with 2222 or one of the two, those, which is what it's already expecting.
Yes. So, just to give you an idea, I think most people are familiar in this room with Ethernet and people. Right? Did you ever see that? So you go to an RSV station, to an RSV, guess what? All of a sudden, RSVs were built in a tree, and there behind the PRC, there's a control net, segment, etc. They will expose all the devices with all the configurations. And guess what? We're doing the exact same thing. So if you would compare the wire traffic in Wireshark, for example, you won't see a difference. And also the PLCs, they can't tell. Oh, might that be not RSVs, it might be OTbase, they won't know. So this is how our discovery works.
But you were suggesting that why you get the use of those and XT cards in the first place and you can put those stick to the backend. So back to your point, you are not a scan.
How does RSVs do that? How does RSVs do that?
And the broadcast to the network.
It's exactly not a broadcast. So the technical term would be SIP protocols. So in the SIP protocol, control information protocol, there is a built-in functionality that allows you to browse what is on the net. Okay, it's a legitimate function. It's not hacking. It's not scanning. You're just taking advantage of the legitimate functions that you have in all of these protocols. Same thing with Profinet,
example.
right? So those are built-in legitimate functions that we use to our advantage. In other words, we simply ask the device who are you? Which version are you? Let's talk about that. All of that is legitimate communication. So you're getting the same information from the devices as you can see in our screens.
So is there a way in there that you can work with the site to determine what their crown jewels are so they can focus on the CVs of those?
Yes.
Which, that's kind of the point I was trying to ask earlier. Like, could we take ACLs off SD-WAN or actual firewall rules for like an ICS DMARC and use those to apply to the vulnerabilities so you can actually better rank which ones you need to go after?
Yes.
Because if there's no exposure.
Correct. Absolutely. So
Are you pulling some of the data out of the engineering workstation backup or directly off the engineering workstation?
we don't do it. Yeah. It's always direct solicitation of those asset properties. Again, that
are legitimate functions of these protocols. So just to finish up that discussion about the architecture, discovery is totally separated from the central database. Here is where the credentials sit. Certainly, you need to tell discovery, right? My SMMP version 3 credentials. You need to tell them your Windows credentials, because we also download all the installed software data. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to tell you about vulnerabilities on the Windows boxes, right? But the credentials stay here. And all the asset information is passed in a unidirectional way up to the central database. Please.
Can you use a dialogue between the OTbase
Yes, yes.
and the
And you can also use a DMZ between there, because we don't require a direct online dialogue connection. So if you have to traverse the DMZ, this guy provides the data simply as an encrypted file. And you make sure that this encrypted file at some point in time ends up here in the enterprise network where this service sits. Okay, but coming to mitigation, I haven't forgot it, right? So once that you have done all your CVE matching, then the question is what to do with this mess. And we have already talked about this very useful feature, KEV only, right? So that you will only see those vulnerabilities with known exploits. There are other ways, or let me put it this way. You need context for this prioritization. You need to build that strategy. And one other way how OTbase gives you that context would be, when you look at this table right here, now we are looking at individual devices that are plagued by vulnerabilities. And those devices are ranked by what we call a risk score. And that's a simple computation where several factors go in. One of these factors is the what we call the V-score. This is simply all the CVSS base scores summed up, right? So we take all the CVEs that affect this particular box. Every CVE comes with a CVSS base score, which is like an expression of the badness. And we sum that value up. And in this case, the sum is roughly 860. Then we bring in two additional factors. One is the criticality of the device. And let me tell you, this goes a long way, because it's about the function of the device. How critical is that PLC or that engineering station for your operations? If that particular device is compromised, if it malfunctions, is that a big problem, or is it just a nuisance? This is where your SMEs provide an assessment. They assign a criticality. If they do that, and they can also express why this is critical, so for example, well, it's an engineering station, then this is factored into the computation of this risk score. And then the last factor here is the exposure, which means network exposure, right? Because it's certainly a big difference if that particular device is actually buried in what you may fantasize about as an air-gapped segment. Or let's just say at least you think it's very well protected. And then there are other devices where you positively know, well, this device is exposed to the internet, right? And this is expressed in this exposure field. So and this is why this particular Windows PC here ranks at the top, because it comes with a high number of vulnerabilities. It also comes with public exposure. That means that it's exposed to the public internet, and it has assigned a criticality, right? And then if we look at the details here for this particular PLC, this is what we call a device profile in OTbase. So you just need to do a double click, and then you get additional details for this particular item. And then you would see, oh, there's Windows 7 installed, and yeah, patching, not so many patching. Let's look at the security section here. This is like the patch history of that device. And here again, you can see for this individual device what the known vulnerabilities are. And again, by default, we only expose vulnerabilities with known exploits. And you would find in our sample database, you would find a lot of devices with even more CVEs, but this particular box is ranked at the highest position because it's facing the public internet and it has a criticality assigned. Ma'am. SNMP doesn't define criticality. Your SME, your subject matter experts, like your engineers. Yes, yes, actually there is this capability, and actually that's a good point, because what you want to do when you try to define your vulnerability management strategy, it rarely makes sense to look at isolated devices, right? It makes much more sense to view those devices in their functional context. And this is something that OTbase allows you to model extremely well. So let's go to the inventory that we so far haven't looked at. And in the inventory, you can define your OT systems or your machine lines, for example, your plant components. And usually what you would do is you would assign the criticality to a system or a system component. And then from there, it's inherited down to the devices, right? So that is the more practical approach here. So for example, here you see a couple of systems that are defined for this sample database. And no, wait a second. I know people from the power industry here. So let's look at a power plant. So you can model your systems with all their, individual components. You can assign criticalities to those system components, and they are then used in the criticality computation, right? Yes.
Red TV the app before, one of the things that was supposed to be is around because it's right. Like you take two products and stitch them together, like level user followed by privilege escalation.
Yeah.
I've now got a 10, I stitch two products.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Does it do any kind of calculation?
No, unfortunately, it does not do that kind of calculation. So what you would see is, let's go back to the vulnerability management. You see a couple of different ways on how to actually look at your vulnerability landscape, okay, on your attack surface, if you will, right? And by combining these different views on the attack surface, this will give you some very good angles for your mitigation. But I totally agree. You should never rely solely on, for example, the CVSS base core. I mean, even worse would be, you say, well, we're only looking at critical severity, right? So that is not a good strategy. But when it comes to mitigation, I think what you're going to find is that there are other pointers that you get from OTbase that allow for more efficient mitigation, which is unrelated to patching everything. Let me give you an example. So one of the of the pages that you see in OTbase in the vulnerability management workspace is a software table that is where you see all your installed software products, and the listing is ranked by how much the individual software products contribute to your attack surface, right? And that would give you a good idea about hardening opportunities, right? So in this example right here, I would see that on the very top, there is one software product that accounts for a large amount of vulnerabilities or attack surface, if you will, and that happens to be Microsoft Windows 7. So that would give me, as the risk manager, an opportunity to consider, well, maybe if we just start with updating all those Windows 7 operating systems, that is really going to give me some good bang for the buck. Whereas an isolated patching of, let's just say, those cross-site scripting vulnerabilities in PLCs will not give us so much. Okay, so session is already over. If you found it interesting what you saw, don't forget we will be here all week long. We will be doing presentations around the clock. Feel free to come back and always ask questions. Thank you very much.
That website public?
if you want to understand what OT asset management really means and what it is all about, it helps to go back in time and get an understanding of how that whole OT field actually evolved, how that digital OT, that networked OT came into being, how it got that importance that it enjoys right now. So it all started with the capability to process the data from your equipment, from your sensors, actuators, etc., that you could process all that information on computers. And certainly at a time when computers became considerably cheap. You are no longer talking about mainframe computers or those mini computers. So we are talking about personal computing, we were talking about networks. It was all about the process data. And that yielded a lot of value for the asset owners that they thought, well, fantastic, let's have more of that. And so they got more process data. And that continued to a point where we are now, where organizations struggle to actually understand what they got when it comes to the infrastructure. And that is the blind spot that OT asset management addresses. So the whole development of OT was always focusing on process data, on the content, if you will, in modern parlance, right? It was focusing on the content. And OT asset management, on the other hand, is focusing on infrastructure. Certainly, you need a proper infrastructure so that this content is reliable, it's accurate, it's timely, etc. Right? And that is the big divide or the big shift in your attention when you want to understand what OT asset management is really about. It's about your infrastructure that is made up of hardware, software, and networks. OT asset management does not focus on those transient. So for asset management, that's an externality. Therefore, it also does not focus on anomaly detection. And that's another thing where it helps you to, if you apply this lens, where it helps you to separate OT asset management from ICS detection, as an example. You can clearly see that in the beginning of OT security as an industry, we saw that same mindset. We have to focus on data content. This is what anomaly detection is all about, right? But this is not what OT asset management is all about. In asset management, you focus on configurations. You focus on considerably static asset properties. You don't focus on data content. And for that reason, well, you are concerned with a very reliable and accurate determination of the various firmware versions that you have installed, the network topologies, etc. And now here is the interesting twist of events, I would say. You can make the argument that this focus on infrastructure gets you to a much better place when it comes to OT security, because now you can really focus on vulnerability mitigation, on long-term vulnerability mitigation. Since all of those CVEs, by the way, how many are there if you look at the present total of CVEs, it's roughly about 250,000, okay? No, that's quite a lot. So that gives attackers a lot of stuff to work with. And all of these, their importance, the question, are you affected by these CVEs or not? All of these can be answered just by looking at your infrastructure, period. You don't need to look at data content. It's all about the infrastructure and configuration. And this is what OT asset management brings to the table. So as opposed to focusing on the data that moves back and forth on the wire, that's a different area of OT security that we have focused on for much too long. So in other words, I could say that the same mistake was made as with OT as a whole, that users were obsessed with data content. And I mean, that's not a criticism, because certainly it was valuable. It was so valuable that this whole field exploded. But that is where the problem comes in, because all that development of OT and OT networks in factories, etc., was not properly governed. It was not properly planned. It was just done as yet another bolt-on extension of existing networks. It was done without any systematic planning. It was done without any risk management, if you will, right? So what would the consequences be? It was done without any change management. And that's the big issue that needs to be resolved today, because asset owners find themselves in a spot where they just totally lost track of what they have. So the fate of the enterprise is built on something that they no longer fully understand. That is the issue at hand, right? And why do they no longer understand that? Because the complexity just went totally overboard. Let's start with a very simple question. How many networks are we talking about in a typical manufacturing environment for, let's just say, a mid to large size factory? But it's certainly more than 5 or something that you would expect on the IT side. Let me tell you, usually it's a couple hundred. You didn't know that as the asset owner? Oh, sorry, or you should, right? And beyond that, you should exactly and specifically know what is connected to those networks. You should exactly know all the gateways, all the routing paths that are possible. You should exactly know about all the characteristics of these networks, their purpose, what are the endpoints in there for, right? What operating system versions are those endpoints running? Are those VFDs? Are those sensors? Are those Office PCs? What do you have? Well, guess what? Some asset owners are surprised when they introduce an asset management system. Oh, we have so many networks we have never heard about, and then we even enterprise network. That is a regular observation, and that gives you an idea about the overboarding complexity that has led to this scenario where asset owners completely lost track. And the bottom line is, this problem has become so big that there is no way that you could solve or even address that problem by using Microsoft Excel and a bunch of guys that you send around and they try to collect a manual asset inventory. It doesn't work, right? So this is where you definitely must use an automated OT asset management solution such as OTbase. This is what we're doing. This is what OT asset management is all about. It's about the capability to understand your OT infrastructure and also to assess if that infrastructure is configured properly in respect to OT security. So when you think about your attack surface, and also in respect to efficiency, in respect to maintainability, all of that comes into play, because let's just say you have all those high-flying dreams about the digital transition and the industry 4.0, but how would you ever be able to get there by simply bolting on another IoT device onto your existing networks? That's not going to cut it. So you must be able to furnish a strategy. And this is something that you can only do based on data. And the OT asset management system is that platform that yields this data. is about large-scale OT asset inventories. How do you build the large-scale OT asset inventory? But before we jump into the details, for the audience, this whole thing will be live streamed by us. It's all 3.5 days. You can follow our live stream on YouTube or on LinkedIn, and it's going to be also available after the fact on YouTube. So if you want to go back to anything that you found interesting or that you want to look up, you will find it on our YouTube channel. So again, feel free to interrupt me at any point in time. You want this to be lively and interactive. Here is your chance to actually dive into the details, what it means to, or let's say, how you can challenge our assumptions, our product, etc. We will try to explain how it actually works and how it can get you to a large-scale OT asset inventory. Why are we talking about large-scale? Well, a simple reason, because this is the niche that we have been focusing on. We have an OT asset management system called OTbase, and we specifically target large global enterprises where you have, let's just say, thousands of networks, right? You're not specifically targeting small utilities, on the other hand, as an example, where it's about 10 networks and 200 devices. This is not our niche. So obviously, when you want to scale, there are some problems that need to be addressed. And one of the problems that need to be addressed with the scalability is that this would be a real big problem when you need specific dedicated hardware for your asset discovery. If only for that reason, we decided very early in the development that we could not use passive sniffing, like what all the ICS detection vendors do, with the idea, oh, but it's safe. Well, trust me, active is also safe if you do it right. Right, so, and that's what you're going to get into later in this presentation. But if you are talking about more than 1,000 networks, you have no desire to deploy thousands of those appliances in your networks, to configure those discovery networks and to mess around with the switch configuration. You don't want to do that. It just doesn't scale. So therefore, we are talking about active discovery only. And then the question is, how do you do this active discovery in a way that does not disrupt the process? Well, in a nutshell, it's not so difficult, because what you have heard about active scanning is something different, right? So what you see in OTbase, and I'll get to the details in a minute, that is not scanning. Your typical IT product, if you think about Qualys as an example, it opens thousands of TCP and UDP ports and sends traffic to those ports. Thousands. In IT, you can do that. In OT, you will have a problem with that, because some of your devices will just fail. But that is what everybody knows already for a long time. Guess what? We also know this, right? We have told this our customers in consulting 25 years ago. So then certainly we are not stupid and make the same mistake. So therefore, when we have defined our discovery strategy, it was pretty clear we will only be using legitimate industrial protocols. And I tell you what that means. So
Say large scale, are you finding that by networks or endpoints or sites? How are you defining?
Okay. Yeah, large scale, certainly it's a vague term, right? But for us, it means, well, you have probably 10 different sites or more. You have somewhere north of 50,000 devices, and you have maybe up to 1,000 or more than 1,000 networks. And that is actually not difficult to achieve, right? So when you are, I don't know which industry you are in, but when you have multiple facilities all over the globe, and especially when you're in manufacturing, discrete manufacturing, you have a shit ton of OT devices. And this is where we live, right? This is what the product is designed for. When you are in process industries, for example, you don't have that much of a problem because the device density isn't that high. But in discrete, it's extremely high. So how do we discover in a safe manner? Let's go back to the product architecture, which you can see here. The big database that you have seen earlier is sitting in your enterprise network. This is where all the other information arrives. So down here, that could be your 30 facilities all over the globe. It can. But the good news is it's then still self-administered by you, right? So you have full custody over your data. We don't force our customers in the cloud. We sell it as an on-premise solution, but certainly you're free to install it in a private cloud environment. The important thing is you retain custody over your data, which is also good for us because we don't have to go through all that legal bullshit with how we protect your confidential data, etc.
So the discovery is sitting down on the PCN, or is it in the pen, or it's anywhere I want?
We get there. We get there in a second. So just keep in mind, this is this dichotomy here. This is a two-tier architecture where this is in the enterprise network, and down here you have, let's just say, your 30 different manufacturing sites as an example, right? And this communication here between those two components is unidirectional. This guy will never attempt to talk down to those guys, and it doesn't need to. Right? So these are self-contained. You configure them once, and then they execute autonomously. Right? So they do a periodic discovery of your networks. And now we get to the question, well, what are these networks? In a nutshell, that's up to you. So you would define, and certainly we can help you with that process, the best hosting candidates for such a solution. And how many, where and how many of these guys you actually need to deploy in a given facility all depends on your existing network architecture. What do I mean by that? If you have already a highly segregated network architecture in your OT environment, you will have to deploy more than one of these discovery instances, right? But that's good for you, because if you could discover everything from one host, well, you don't even need to do a risk assessment anymore. You know you're screwed, right? Because from this single point, if you can reach all your OT devices, then a piece of malware could achieve the same thing. So it depends on your network architecture.
So with this new safety system, or would you consider that separate, and that's a manual load?
Well, I would say, let's try to untangle this. First of all, if you can route into critical network segments like safety networks, that's not good, right? So in other words, you could say your first real world test of how good your network segregation is simply by running OTbase discovery and see what you will get. All the networks that you can reach, all the device data that you can collect, right? That might be more than you would like to see. So that would already give you an angle, right, on how to harden or how to arrive at a more secure network architecture. But if you would consider that, let's just stick with a safety network, for example, you can't route into that network. Congratulations. Then what you would do for discovery, you would place the discovery inside that safety network on a local PC. By the way, it's all software. So this is all just a piece of software. You can run it on Windows, you can run it on Linux, you can run it on a Raspberry Pi, right? And you would place that on the safety network to stay in your example. There it does its thing. And now the question is, can you communicate outbound? Usually you can. If you can't because it's totally separated, well, then that would be the prototypical air-gapped network. Well, then you could simply copy the information to a laptop, for example, and then upload it manually. So that possibility also exists, because we do not.
So sorry to ask you something.
Come on, no.
So,
I love it.
I can't remember last presentation when you said it's purely active, or is it active and active?
No, it's purely active. We only do active.
So you won't be picking coming out of the enterprise network, therefore not discovering anything on the other side of that firewall.
That's a different thing. So we might pick up communication. How is that possible? Because I said, well, we're active only. There is one exception to that rule. We also digest your NetFlow and SFlow data from your switches if they provide such data. So OTbase can and will tell you about data flow if you have those services configured and running. That is the exception from the rule. However, we will not make any attempt to guess what the identity of that originating device might be. So in other words, we don't do any deep packet inspection because we simply found it unreliable, not worthwhile doing it. But we would inform you about, oh, no, there is data traffic from the internet into your safety network. You should probably check that. So this would raise some alarms in the application, right? But let's just go back to the example. You have a segregated network or subnet. You place the discovery software inside that subnet. It does its thing. It does the discovery. And when it can route either to the enterprise network or to some intermediate staging server to traverse a DMZ, etc., then that's the easy part, right? So then you would be able to enjoy this automatic pushing of the discovery information to the central database.
So if you had 20,000 inside the network, how much data is that pushing across your up to the network use?
That depends. By the way, before we go in there, you can discover 20,000 devices with one discovery node. It would again only tell you, that's probably the first thing you want to change when it comes to security, right? Because if one host can talk to all those 20,000 devices, you positively know already you have a security problem, right? But the data size, that depends on the nature of the endpoints. Because, as an example, for a Windows PC, you see all the installed software. You see the installation dates, right? You see all the security patches. And that obviously is more information than if we think about an actuator, variable frequency drive, for example, where it's about make, model, version, and firmware. That's it, right? So that's only a small chunk of information. So that depends. But I mean, in practical terms, you would see file sizes in average for about, I would say, 10 to 50 megabytes. Yes.
Not arguing that apps don't take a lot of but if you're in a network or a state that is highly segregated, which you want, when you have to deploy the boxes, the app is customized them for the individual assets. You find that it would offset because it's a large scale deployment, so the effort will really overcome the effort absent, although the value is good.
Well, you tell me. So certainly, let's stick with the last part of your question. The value is certainly different because with active you get all the information you need. With passive you don't. You have to infer the identity and configuration of the endpoint, right? With active, the endpoint simply tells you what it is, where it runs, etc. But what about the effort? So certainly the major question is, do you have existing hosting candidates in those subnets, right? And so again, take in mind, this software is available for Windows, Linux, Raspberry Pi. If you don't have any of these, well, I would suggest either you invest $50 in a Raspberry Pi, or you use a laptop and go and send some intern there. Let's just say every week, you know, he connects the laptop to that subnet, does the discovery, and then uploads the information manually to OTbase inventory. This is how it would be done. All right, so if you are in a situation where there is absolutely no possible hosting candidate available. Okay, so now let's take a closer look at this discovery. On a Windows machine, it's a two-parter. It's a Windows service. Why a service? Because you want to have it running continuously even if nobody's logged on. Discovery runs autonomously in a 24-hour window. So every 24 hours, it wakes up, does its discovery, stores the asset information in a file. If it can, pushes this file up automatically to inventory where it is processed. Please.
Can we throttle that?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. And so that's a service that runs on its own, self-contained. But you have to configure the service. And this is what we are doing right now. What you see here is the configuration UI for OTbase discovery for one of these nodes. And certainly you can see already, well, that's a Windows application. But it's a client-server architecture, right? So this is not really the actual server. This is just an interface, a client for this server, and it could even be run remotely. Okay, and then once that you start this configuration UI, what you're going to see right away is here in the left part of the table is all the local networks that Discovery has already identified. Well, you know, I can access these local subnets, and so then you can configure those for your Discovery. In addition to that, to those that you see here already, you can add further networks that you can route into. So if you have routing opportunities, well, you can just tell OTbase, well, I also want to add another network. Add remote network like so.
More than one sensor can detect the same network. Is the main database do an analysis for the device discovered that have one or
Hell yeah. But it's, you know, it's funny, but we actually thought that. but I tell you what, no. So, but humor aside, you are actually touching on one of the toughest problems in OT asset discovery or OT asset management, if you will, because in OT it's the norm that you see many devices with identical IP addresses. 192.168.1.15, and you have 20 of these, right? Because all the machine lists are configured identically on purpose. That's the reality. That's the norm in OT. You have devices in networks that are discovered by multiple discovery nodes from different sites. That's a reality. If we would be able to deal with that, the product would be shit, and I wouldn't stand here, right? So this is all taken care of. In other words, you could say when OTbase inventory digests that information, a lot of heuristics is going on, a lot of figuring out, oh, do I know this guy already? Well, no, I know the IP address, but actually there are 5 possible hits, right? So let's figure out which one it is. So that's a huge part of this whole discovery process. But let's get back to the configuration of the discovery service. So once that you select any of these networks here, in the right pane, you see your configuration options. And I think some of these options will ring a bell. So you would see something like WinRM or SNMP. So you can tell Discovery, for this network, I want you to use WinRM. If you would enable any of these protocols, you would also specify your credentials, your access credentials for the switch if you happen to use SNMP version 3, or for your Windows boxes if you're talking about WinRM. These credentials, however, stay local. They will never be pushed up to OTbase inventory. Okay, and then once that you have done that for all the networks you intend to discover,
How are they stored on the file?
oh, just in the plain text file. What is that a problem?
My mortgage company kept mine in the plain.
Oh, it's encrypted. It's in I don't know, shard 256, I believe. Yeah, now we have lost the connection because, by the way, you cannot see that, but the server where I'm connecting to is actually in Europe. You know, all the funny things that the internet makes possible, or in this case, not possible. So I wanted to show you how this discovery process actually looks like, and I think the interesting piece, it really takes only a couple of seconds, right, for an individual device, and then you got all the information that you're interested in. And once that this is done, which happens automatically behind the scenes without anybody needing to log on, then the data is pushed to OTbase inventory, where it is processed and everything is sorted into that global database. And the asset inventory in OTbase gives you various different views on your installed base. What you see here is the device inventory. You see that in the sidebar, devices, that's highlighted in orange, where you can check out all the individual devices. By the way, the color codes represent device types. So gray, for example, would be network gear, and then we have PLCs are color coded in pink, in violet, and so on. But there are other views available on your inventory, such as the software view, where you can search and analyze all your software installations. And just to show you again, if you want details on anything that you see, you just do a double click, and then you get additional details in a pop-up window. So for this product, if I wanted to check this out, I see the known vulnerabilities for this product, and I see where I have it installed, all the various installations.
So are you working with companies like Honeywell and you acknowledge certify this so that it's not a
No.
problem with
No.
their service?
Well, you know, these companies such as Honeywell and Yokogawa, they tell me, well, screw you. No, we will not certify you. Sorry. But I mean, in all honesty, the problem is that these large DCS vendors have no desire to open up, right? They probably don't necessarily want you to see all the various details of their configurations. We do make it happen, though. So the workaround here is that if you're using Honeywell or Yokogawa as an example, they have proprietary tools for the inventorying, which allow you to export the data as, for example, an XML file or a CSV file. And then we can digest that intermediate file, and you will also see the devices in OTbase. But for the DCS vendors, well, I think you, as an asset owner, you know how that goes. They try to be as closed up as possible, unfortunately. Anyhow, so let's continue here with the inventory. This is a different view on your asset inventory. This is about systems that could be DCS systems, for example, or it could be machine lines. And in that view, what you can see is like all the devices, all the OT devices that make up a specific machine line, as an example. You will see all the networks that are associated with that machine line. You see an automatic port list for your switches, what's connected to what. And then you see a list of all the endpoints along with their connectivity data. On top of that, you can also get a network topology map. And so you get a system documentation, which in many cases is more useful than looking at your OT assets at an atomic level, like at the device level. So what you see here is a network topology for this particular OT system. And as you may remember, we are using different color codes to indicate device type. So anything in red here, for example, would be actuators. In this case, it's variable frequency drive. So see when you scroll, when you zoom in. All right, so then you see all the additional detail, and you can always do another drill down, which will get you all the other device details. Okay, then we have the networks inventory, pretty self-explanatory.
For those systems automatically grouped together, was that manual?
No, that is something that you have to tell OTbase. It cannot know where the boundaries are, but that is what you do once, right? You do that one time, and then you can get this documentation at the system level. Okay, so network inventory, here you could also do your topology mapping if you want to, and finally we got the locations. Which is super important when we're talking about large-scale inventories, because when you cannot pinpoint the geolocation of a device or a network, it pretty much doesn't make any sense, right? And so this also something that you would have to tell. You would have to tell OTbase, where is this damn thing located, in which site, and best case also in which building, floor, room, or cabinet. Right? So, and then that will yield a lot of additional benefit, because within those location profiles, as we call them, you would also be able to store like floor plans, something like that, where your users have will find it very conveniently to actually understand, okay, this is that PLC in the paint shop, right? In that specific section of the process, for example, right? So that effort usually is really worthwhile. And then you down there, you can also get again a list of all the devices in that particular location, along with the topology map, etc. Okay, questions so far?
Have you heard of OPAP, and are you interested in that at all?
Have I heard about what?
OPAP, OPAF.
OPAF.
Open source protocol.
It rings a bell. It rings a bell. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It rings a bell. Yes.
I think that that alleviates a lot of these vendor issues.
Yeah. Hopefully. Well, I mean, but when it comes to protocols, we don't have any preference. We do what the market demands. So, I mean, the whole product is pretty much customer driven. Kevin, is that a fair statement or not? So we listen to our customers and then what they need, and also where we see a business opportunity, obviously, then we implement those protocols. But I think the protocol that you have mentioned is pretty in the early stages. Is that right?
I think Exxon's doing a deployment.
Okay. So we would.
The other, your talk is ins and outs, so I assume your outs here are the deployment at the site, all the manual data you'll have to put in there to get full user.
Yes, that is correct. And I think that's actually a very important and valid point. If you want to end up with a useful asset inventory, you have to provide these additional metadata. Metadata is what ties the asset information that we can collect from the devices to use cases. Without that metadata, it's pretty much useless. The good news is that you do that once. So you would tell OTbase once, well, you know, this specific discovery node is in the Flatrock facility. So anything that comes from there should end up in Flatrock, maybe in that particular part of the site, right? So these are, now this is a network topology map structured by geolocation within that particular site. So that is what you do once. And certainly also, if you think about these floor maps here, these interactive floor maps, well, that is something that you have to add manually. But the good news is you do that once and it actually will not take you more than 15 minutes. If you don't do that, you will find your asset inventory of little use. It really pays off to go all the way. Kevin, what say you? What say you? Is that also a fair statement that first of all, it's worthwhile adding the information about location, etc., and it's also not extremely difficult to do?
So the other is, on the earlier talking about the CVEs, we have found that a lot of the users of the site have difficulty understanding the CVEs as they're published. What we've done separately is we've produced a dumbed down version of the CVE to give to engineers to make sure they understand the criticality and vulnerability that's recently come out.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I understand this and read it. Unfortunately for us, not everyone has that capability.
Yeah. Well, and so I think what relates to what you're saying in OTbase is you can modify, you can massage the CVE information as presented. You can also add your comments. You can highlight particular CVEs. You can change the priority of a CVE, etc. And this is obviously what you have to do because engineers, or I would even phrase it differently. I think in my experience, the best way to address the CVE problem is to assign the analytics part to, let's just say, somebody who is very good at it in HQ. Because this requires a lot of expertise and unload this burden from the engineers. I think it's probably good enough when you have a reliable way to communicate to the engineers, well, this really needs to be fixed. We have done our analysis and we have decided this must be fixed. You could even say by the end of the month.
Well, I assume that's what we will be doing in some of these field fronts.
Yes.
Applying
Yes.
some criticality to it and also
Yes.
applying whether that's
Yes.
highly critical asset that the site.
Yes.
And whenever the site goes and looks at its CVEs, it's going to sort those top items.
Yes.
Make sure they address
Yes,
those.
they will only look at their stuff. So I mean, we are only scratching the surface here. So let me give you an idea how that works. Let's go to reports. So this is yes, exactly. So they would have their individual reports, and they can also be limited to a specific site. And one other feature of these reports, anyway, in OTbase, every report is always subject to access control. What does that mean? If you are, let's just say, at an administrative level, you have administrative access, you can see everything. But that same report, if the engineer at the, let's just say, the Flatrock site, with access rights only to that site, is opening the same report, he or she will not see all those devices. They will only see their specific subset that they're supposed to see. So in other words, there are several ways to make it practically useful in OTbase. So here you have your reporting, you have your dashboard, and then you have your notifications, etc., in order to make it really practical. Good. Any other questions in closing? Fantastic. So just as a reminder, we are live streaming all week long. If you find yourself sitting at a boring talk in the other ballrooms, just tune into our live stream. See if you can find if you find that more entertaining, and come back to our sponsor room. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
people in the OT security space are obsessed with threats. Why do I say that? Because when you look at all the publications on the discussions on LinkedIn and other social media platforms, it's mostly about the latest threat actor or the latest malware strain, etc. And that has the tendency to lure practitioners and, let's just say, the blue team, the defense team, into an area where you are fighting a battle that you can never win. You will never be able to always counter the latest threat, the threat du jour, as the French would say, right? And just think about that. So hear me out. I think it's counterintuitive, but hear me out. Just analyze or just check how long it takes the average asset owner to make any planned configuration change when it comes to implementing OT security measures. Well, I can tell you, based on my experience in 20 years of OT security consulting, it may take a couple of years. Let's just say best case, a couple of weeks. Okay, now tell me how that should work, that there is this new threat coming out and then all of a sudden everybody goes in panic mode and focuses only on this new threat or this new malware strain, this new exploit. How should that actually work? It won't work because you will always be too late. You can never keep up if you are in reactive mode, right? So that tells us we must do something proactively. We must already be prepared. In other words, what I suggest to do is to focus on a long-term strategy where you strive for incremental improvements rather than always be in reactive mode and react to the latest publication on that new threat vector, that new botnet or whatever it might be. And guess what? That long-term strategy in most cases isn't rocket science. So when you think about all the vulnerabilities that define your attack surface, what do you expect to find? You will not find totally unexpected revelations. Oh, damn, we have this very specific vulnerability that only affects us. No, it's not like that. You will see basic, even banal vulnerabilities that pretty much every other asset owner is plagued with as well. What do I mean by that? Just think about typical examples. Think about outdated operating system versions. Think about something like Windows XP systems, systems still running Windows 7. That is a reality on the plant floor. You don't know how many of those you have and where they are. Well, then you just check your OT asset management system. In OTbase, that's a snap. You will get that list right away. You can even enter a policy. Windows 7 is not allowed in our facility, and all those devices will be singled out, and the users will get a notification about that. So that is very simple to do in principle. So certainly to update those systems, that's a different story. But it's much more efficient to focus on those foundational problems that define your attack surface, rather than on those than to get into that event-driven mode of thinking and of acting. Okay, let me give you another example. Software products such as Adobe Flash Player or TeamViewer, they have no place in an OT environment. If you just single them out and if you remove them from the specific systems, then your security posture will dramatically rise. And how can I say this? Well, because we have the numbers. In OTbase, you get the numbers. You can see how much each of those software products contribute to your attack surface. How many unpatched or vulnerable systems you have with these particular software products. How much they contribute to your overall CVSS score. Right? So that is, I don't have to guess. I can tell you in some kind of metric
fashion, right? So you get numbers for this, and that is the different mindset that I suggest you to in order to progress in OT security. Stay away from the latest threats, from the latest malware strains, from the latest report that an OT security vendor has published. Just focus on your attack surface and what you would need to do to achieve meaningful reductions of that attack surface. What do I mean by meaningful? But like something like, but what will be the net result be when you take a simple metric such as CVSS base score, for example? So you just need to add all those CVSS base scores. That gives you a good metric, right? And then if you have eliminated all those CVEs, and then you can see that number shrink. That's a good metric. It also will show you, it will give you an idea, well, that's a lot of stuff that's affected by this one software product, right? That's a lot of attack surface that is created by that. So that would be a more sustainable approach, and also as anybody can understand, that is unrelated to a specific threat, because all of these latest threats, they all exploit something that in the OT space has existed for many years. So the most important malware or ransomware or whatever it might be is not associated to that latest 0 day. No, it's related. It's exploiting vulnerabilities that are well known for years. How do you find out about those vulnerabilities? Well, you just go to OTbase and you will see it. You can measure it, and that is where you get really solid data that allows you to find the right direction to make meaningful progress when it comes to reducing your attack surface. Doing with audits and establishing policies for compliance checking is that we bundle specific configurations into something that is approved by the company and something that isn't approved. In other words, we are not looking at individual devices and their configuration, but we are looking at specific classes of devices, or we are looking at specific configurations that per se we say are not allowed. We don't want to have those configurations. And why would we do that? Well, because we positively know that specific configurations are real troublemakers. Let me give you some popular examples. The presence of Windows XP operating systems in OT, which is a reality in today's environment still, that is a big problem. That is something that you want to get rid of. But now the question becomes, how can I actually make that happen? The goal is clear. You know positively, if you would eliminate your Windows XP systems, if you would eliminate your Windows 7 systems, by just doing that,
you will shrink down the attack surface because thousands and thousands of CVEs would just disappear. I mean, just besides the fact that you couldn't patch those CVEs anyway, because there are no longer patches available for those outdated systems. So the objective is, let's just get rid of those insecure products, okay? And now the task becomes, how can you identify that? And how can you also expose that to the responsible people? And this is where OTbase comes in. Certainly, once that you have a solid OT asset inventory, you can now use the data in that OT asset inventory and put some criteria on it, where you tell users, for example, no, this is not an approved configuration. What I'm going to show you in this presentation is how you actually make that happen in OTbase. So on this page here, we are already in the audits workspace within OTbase, where you can define your OT policies. And you see that we already have a couple of sample policies in here. And the first policy says, must not have Adobe Flash on those OT devices. Why would we not want to have Adobe Flash Player on our OT devices? Well, for two reasons. We positively know Adobe Flash carries hundreds of CVEs with it. And we also know that in most cases, it's not even needed for OT applications, for OT use cases. So one smart strategy would be what we call system hardening. Just get rid of the damn product, right? And this will free up hundreds or thousands of CVEs. So by the way, how do we arrive at this insight? Which products actually carry tons of vulnerabilities? Well, we arrive at this insight also using OTbase, because in the CVE workspace, you can see which software products actually carry the most important vulnerabilities. And when it comes to obsolete products such as Flash Player, well, you should get rid of them anyway, then you can turn this into a policy. And this is, again, what we are doing here. So in this policy, let's click on Edit here so that you can see how this is done. We tell OTbase, use a saved search, and I'll get to that in 5 minutes, how this works. So from your inventory, just pick those devices that have Adobe installed, anything from Adobe, and then in this section, prohibited software, we define no Flash must not be on those devices. That's basically it. And once that I've defined this policy, OTbase will automatically audit my devices against that policy. And how does that look like? If I do a double click here, this opens what we call the policy profile, where I now get the details on this particular policy. So I can see that I have, from all the devices where Adobe is installed, 200 are compliant, and I have 61 which are non-compliant. And I can specifically see where these devices are. And for any of these affected devices, I could also do another drill down. So just to give you an idea what you would see when you just check out that individual device, because now you will also see in the device profile a section that is called compliance. And that compliance section also informs anybody dealing with that particular device, oh, you know what, your device is non-compliant. In this case, it violates 2 different policies that are defined for this sample environment here. This is our Adobe Flash Player policy. This is non-compliant because this actually has Adobe Flash installed. The other, by the way, it's running an outdated operating system. It's running Windows 7. And we have a third policy where it actually is compliant because it does not run TeamViewer, which is another software product that we have identified as prohibited. Okay. So this way, anybody who is investigating these devices will immediately see, well, Houston, we got a problem here. This device is not compliant against two separate policies. And here you could also see from your various policies that you have defined what the ratio is between compliant and non-compliant devices and how many are there. Like 76% are compliant with this policy and the rest is non-compliant. Another means of analytics would be in the reporting section of OTbase, where you can associate such policies with reports. And this is what you see here. So this is like more a snapshot. If you don't, for example, if you're not interested in what the compliant devices are, because well, usually we don't care. We think, well, that's the good part. We don't need to deal with those. We're focusing on the non-compliant devices. And that is something that you would see here. So I can always associate any of these reports down here with any of these widgets, and then you can also see that in a widget. And once that I do a double click, I can open the report, and what you see here is you get additional stats, you get additional information about that particular policy. So for example, you see what the top vendors are. So when it comes to the devices on that are caught, but that are covered by this policy, the top device types, top operating system versions, etc., life cycle. And then you can also see a timeline. That timeline is important once that you want to see your effort that you're making or fail to make, right? Because what you would like to see is that the blue area gets bigger and bigger and the red area gets smaller and smaller. So you see that over time. And this is how that report feature tells you, or it allows you to track your progress. If you don't see any progress, you have identified an additional problem. Well, now I got my policies, but apparently nobody gives a shit about those policies, right? So then you would have to deal with that in some way. But here you get all the analytics that you need in order to really see if you're making progress or not. Yes, that works pretty much the same way, even though we would not label it as something like compliance. But in OTbase, you do have an obsolescence management included, and you can certainly also associate, or you can create reports, for example, like so, obsolete products, where OTbase tells you, well, these are all your obsolete devices, right? In the charts section up here, you will see so you have a bunch of switches that are obsolete, you have a bunch of PLCs, etc., communication adapters, and then here in the details you can see the individual devices that are obsolete. Same thing, you get a timeline that tells you how you're doing. But in this example, we are doing shitty because our graph is just going up, because we have been doing nothing. And if we just sit there and wait, the number of obsolete products always gets higher and higher, right? Because, time is not our friend when it comes to product obsolescence. But the answer is you can do the same type of analytic, even though in OTbase it would not be labeled as a policy and as compliance. But all the data is available. So that all is possible because we have this rich asset information available. So let's go back to the inventory. In the inventory, you have this powerful search function, this search page, where you can search for pretty much anything and or any combination of asset properties without having to learn the database query language. So let's just assume I wanted to search for obsolete devices or obsolete products to stick with the question. I would say life cycle is phase out, end of life, or discontinued. And then I click on search. And then there are my obsolete devices, as simple as that. Okay? And this is your entry into the reporting. So here you define your queries associated with your various use cases. And once that you have done that, you can save that search like so. Right? So again, latest search on obsolete devices. Click on save. And once that I've done that, I can pull that search up again in this pull down. There is my latest search on obsolete devices. I can also, and anything else that I've searched before, like for a specific product, Rockwell ENBT. And once that I've done that, not only can I pull it up here, like so in this drop down, any saved search will automatically create a report. Right? Please. A level 1. Well, that's what you're looking at. Those are PLCs. So let me give an idea. We just open any of these. That has nothing to do with the protocol, with the SNMP protocol. They also use SNMP, as we can see that here, but they were discovered using Ethernet IP. Okay, and I think what you will understand is with that powerful search capability, you can search for the presence of any software product, any hardware product, any version. Now you can combine that with your criteria, what you would like to see or what you don't want to see. Like, I don't want to see Adobe Flash Player. Then you put that in a policy. And then OTbase will expose, well, sorry to tell you, but you got 500 devices left with that piece of shit software installed. When it comes to cybersecurity, I mean, otherwise it might be a fantastic product. So this is how that works. It all starts with that accurate and complete asset inventory that you now can process. You can run queries against that database, right? And in OTbase, again, you don't have to learn a database query language. You just click your searches together, you save those searches, automatically turns those into a report. And on that reporting, the other thing that's important to understand, like insecure IT protocol usage. So here we have singled out devices that we have identified use either SNMP version 1 or 2 insecure, or they're using Telnet. This is also something that you don't want to see. By the way, interesting topic, I think, because this takes us into another area that is completely unrelated to CVEs. So don't think that once that you got a handle on CVEs, you're good. No, no, no. There are so many other issues and topics that you have to deal with in OT security. So here we are just looking at those. We're exposing all the devices that we have found to support or to use SNMP version 1 or 2 or Telnet, okay? Quite a bunch of devices. And here's my point. This is just another report. This report is dynamic. What does that mean? When I open the report tomorrow or next week, the the content will most likely be different, reflecting any changes. But it's also going to be different depending on the access rights of the user who opens the report, right? Because here, because I have like the global visibility, since I'm the OT security manager devices, but in the Charlotte facility with restricted access will only see devices in Charlotte. He will not see anything else, even though he's opening the same report. And that also solves your problem. And like in the old days, you wanted to communicate this information. What did you do? Well, you just passed along an Excel file. That's bad, because first, your Excel file might not even be current anymore. And second, maybe not everybody who will receive that Excel file should see all the content in there. And that is a problem that you don't need to worry about when you're using these internal dynamic reports in OTbase. Everything is browser-based, as you can see, but everything is undergoing strict access control. Questions? Yeah. Yes.
Can we integrate it into one product? For example, don't touch your product for multi-type. What should be different?
Oh, that's up to you. That's basically up to you, how you define your policy. Yes, so let me give you an example. So in my search, let's go back to the inventory. In my search, when I'm, let's just go back to obsolete devices. I think that's a very simple use case. So let's close this. Oh, actually, I can launch my search that I saved just a couple of minutes ago. So now I see all the obsolete devices, but I could then modify this search and say, well, I just want to see the obsolete device fixed site, like this one, with all it. Okay, search. Oh, now it's only 99. Okay, now if I save that search as well, and then do another saved search for, let's just say, Charlotte, this will yield 2 different reports for those different sites. As easy as that. Other questions? No, it's fully automated. You would never be able to arrive at this functionality with a manual asset inventory. So if you're trying to manually create your asset inventory, you're simply wasting time. It will never yield any useful results. I mean, let me give you an example. Since the topic was brought up, obsolescence, product obsolescence. How long do you want to, how much time do you want to spend to actually check which of your installed devices are obsolete, end of life or something like that? This is going to take you, I don't know, how many engineering hours per week or so. It will never work. It's all automatic, right? Because what we do in the background is we scrape all the vendor web pages where you can find this data, and then we automatically match it against your installed base. This is all like a database match. You would never be able to do that manually. And another example, if you think about installed software, Adobe Flash Player, just imagine how difficult it would be if you wanted to manually check for the presence of Adobe Flash Player on all your Windows PCs that you have in all your facilities. That's just not possible. Sometimes the mofo is even hiding as a component, as an ActiveX control. We can discover that automatically. But if you want to figure that out manually, I mean, how many years do you want to spend on that? How many man years? This just isn't feasible. Automatic is the only way to go. Otherwise, you will not have a useful OT asset inventory. So the complexity is just overwhelming. The sheer amount of data, you're not able to process this. And then when you think about configuration changes, somebody has installed a new firmware. Just the day after you have done your manual OT asset inventory, but now all of a sudden your Excel file is no longer valid. Yeah, that happens. So automatic is the only way to go. Any other question? Okay, guys, then I would say thank you very much for your attention. Be sure to check out our live stream over the next couple of days. If you end up in a boring session, and come back to our sponsor room. Thank you very much for your attention. Unfortunately, most people consider the go-to strategy for vulnerability management patching. But that's IT style thinking. In OT, it doesn't actually give you a lot of mileage. And why is that? Let me point you to a very drastic example. Just a couple of weeks ago, there was a vendor product notification by Rockwell, and they were talking about specific models of static switches. And in their advisory, they tell you it's a security advisory for a new vulnerability in Stratix 5800 and 5200 switches. And now comes a direct quote. As of time of publication, no patch is available for this vulnerability, and multiple cases of active exploitations have been observed. Like, in other words, guys, sorry to tell you, but you are just finding yourself in your worst case scenario. So there is this vulnerability, it has been exploited, and no patch is available. Congratulations. So that is a real life story. You must factor something like this in. And what does this tell you? You cannot always bet on patching. So let's just assume even if then if the patch is not available, then obviously that you must have alternative strategies. And usually those alternative strategies are a little bit more efficient because any patching regime is certainly not a long-term strategy, right? Because it's just for this latest vulnerability, for this latest CVE, then you have fixed the problem. But everybody knows that tomorrow or next week or next month, you might be plagued with new vulnerabilities. So then you go through that patching cycle again. So that is not really sustainable. So the alternative strategy here would be, as in most cases, to furnish a network segregation strategy, just for example. And that will give you a more sustainable approach to your vulnerability management.